Hello everyone, my name is Mark Hanna and I'm the publisher of the Rio Grande Guardian, and today we are in Brownsville having an exciting conversation with César de León. He is the city commissioner at large for the city of Brownsville. César, thank you so much for being with us today.
Mark, always a pleasure.
So we've had some time to chat and to get into a lot of the conversation. Now we have to say it all again, right? Basically, we're going to talk business today. We're going to talk creating a cohesive environment for business in the city of Brownsville, amongst a lot of other things, quality of life, things like that. But before we get into that, Cesar, I think a lot of people tuning in want to know who you are, where you come from, and how you basically develop the characteristics, the talents, and skill set that you have to move forward as a city commissioner. You know, we've talked before this live stream, we said, you know, we're the sum of our experiences, and you have a certain set of experiences that makes you very unique. So talk to us a little bit about that, and then we'll get into the fun stuff, Brownsville fun stuff.
Definitely, Mark. Well, everybody, welcome. Good morning. Thank you for having me here again. I want to begin by saying one of my dad's best sayings. You know, I always talk about common sense, and he always tells me, "Mijito, your common sense is a sum of your experiences." So that is why nobody has a certain common sense. We all have a different common sense, so it's not that common. My dad is an engineer, electrical engineer in Matamoros. My mom is a second grade school teacher here in Brownsville. She's currently teaching at Sharp Elementary. She's been with the district 32 years. So you could say I'm a product of an engineer and an educator.
Yeah.
So I have somebody who is all data-driven, numbers-driven, and I have somebody who understands that to be able to teach a second-year-old, you have to get to the heart.
Yep.
So I think I have both sides. I have my left brain and my right brain working. And so one of the fundamental issues that we had growing up, well, my dad being from Matamoros, being a traditional Mexican father, he didn't want us to lose our Spanish. He wanted us to go to school in Matamoros and do the honores a la bandera. And my mom, being with the Brownsville Independent School District, said, well, I want them to learn English. You know, we live here. I want them to go to school here. What are we going to do? So I think that was one of the first compromises my parents had as we were growing up, where we would go to school here in Brownsville in the mornings, and then they would send to school in Matamoros in the afternoons.
Wow.
So I actually got to go to this little school called San Juan de los Esteros in Matamoros while I was going to St. Mary's Elementary here in Brownsville.
And did you have any other students with you at the time that were kind of doing the same thing?
Believe it or not, there were about 3 or 4 of us that actually started. It was only myself who actually finished junior high and high school. I have a couple of friends that actually did, I think, grade school. There was about 4 of us. And then when it came to junior high and high school, I think I just was the only one, because it was a lot of time, especially going to school on Saturdays in Matamoros.
Yeah.
It did take up a lot of your weekend. So.
Yeah, but I'm sure your mom stayed behind you, right? You got to do it.
You got to do it. I mean, having a mom who's been with the district 32 years, she's actually, maybe some of you that are watching us, you had Proyecto Sol, Esperanza that were implemented here in Brownsville. My mom was a lead developer along with other people on those programs.
Wow.
So when you start talking about just going to school in 2 different countries, you start seeing the different perspectives of how we as Americans see our brethren in Mexico and how our Mexican brethren see us here in the U.S.
Yeah.
So I like to say that we're bicultural because we actually know how to interact with both cultures. But I think even the border itself is a unique region.
Very.
Very unique. And I always tell people it's the river water. It's once you drink from the river, I mean, you don't want to leave, and it kind of changes your dynamics and your perspectives. But now that we have so much of the border coming up in the national media, it's important that we that have this biculturalism can share it with the rest of the country.
Yeah. And talk to us a little bit about your schooling after you graduated. You know, you're an attorney, an economist, amongst other things, but talk to us a little bit about your education once you left the Rio Grande Valley.
Sure, Mark. So right after high school, I went to St. Joseph Academy, graduated, I believe, in 2004. Went off to college. I went to San Antonio. I did my undergraduate studies at St. Mary's University. And I think, as I mentioned before, I had my second year, I had my existential crises where I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life.
Yeah.
Am I in the right major? What do I want to do? Do I want to go back? What am I going to do with my life? You really start well, for lack of a better word, you start freaking out.
Yeah.
You don't know what to do with your future.
It's like a class in college, like, freak out 101. What am I going to do?
What am I going to do with life? The first year, usually, when you get to college, it's pretty fun because everything's new, right?
Correct.
But after your second year, you start realizing, well, I'm already halfway through. What am I going to do with my life?
I think bills are going to start coming.
Bills,
how am I going to do?
And student loans and my rent. And
Yeah.
so at that point, I think what everybody has, their existential crises. My dad said, you should go study abroad. So I ended up going to Spain. I was in Madrid for about 6-7 months. I was at a sister school of St. Mary's in Madrid. All my classes were in Spanish, which was pretty fascinating because, you were doing college level work in Spanish. I hadn't really practiced my Spanish since high school.
Yeah.
And very different, the Castilian Spanish. And then from there, as I lived with a German roommate whose dad was the representative of the European Central Bank in Spain. I had a girl from Russia, a girl from Honduras, and a great gent from New York whose dad was an investment banker.
Wow.
So we had a very talented roommates who most spoke 2 or 3 languages.
Yeah.
And I think Andy, the German, spoke 7 languages. So you start realizing that there's a whole world out there. There's a lot of talent.
Oh, yeah.
So much talent. And you start figuring out, where do I fit in all this? And I decided to come back and finish my degree. And I moved back to the dormitories. And I said, I'm going to do something with my life. And that's the moment I decided that our needs as students weren't really being met as I was living at the dorms. And I said, I'm going to run for student government president. I didn't even know where to start. Let me put it to you that way. So I said, well, who am I running against? And my opponent was, she's a great girl. She was one of the social sororities, a Delta Zeta.
Delta Zeta.
Delta Zeta.
To all the Delta Zetas watching.
Out there, a Delta Zeta. And I said, well, who are the antagonistic group to the Delta Zetas, the traditional rivals? Well, the Tri Sigmas. So the first thing I did is I spoke to the Tri Sigmas that I needed their help to carry on with this election. And they actually turned out that they helped me. We did a very grassroots campaign. We went dorm to dorm, door to door, knocking at every single one of the dorms. And I would get on tables at the cafeteria and I just asked people to vote for me. And we actually had a record-breaking election. A lot of people participated, about 70% of the student body, which was unheard of. So once we actually got elected, I was like, well, what do we do now?
Yeah. Wait,
so,
what's next?
What's next? So what do I do? And one of the things is we started restructuring the student government. We noticed that it wasn't really fulfilling the needs of the students. So what we did is we restructured, 1, how we carried on business, and 2, how we allocated resources to different organizations. The student government is in task with giving, let's say, for example, Delta Zetas or the Tri Sigmas, when they want to host an event, well, they can come to student government.
Okay.
So really this allocation of resources, it was really, well, if you're my friend, you're going to get something.
Yeah.
And we wanted to give it actual performance metrics, and that way, if they came and asked, well, how many people came to your event? What was the purpose of the event? Who are you benefiting? So it became a more professionalized student government. We started a recycling program. We continued with our radio station. And we pushed the administration to bring back a pub. St. Mary's University had a pub on campus.
Really?
Being a Catholic university, they had a pub on campus. And when they changed the drinking age, they moved it from 18 to 21. They did away with the pub. So we started a little fund to actually bring it back. And you're going to believe me, Mark, last year they actually inaugurated the pub.
Really?
So student government and the administration put enough money together that they reopened up our pub.
Well, congratulations to you.
So after almost 9 years that we started a project, it was finally concluded.
Yeah.
I come back, I finish my undergraduate degrees, and I start working in Austin at the Texas House of Representatives. I worked for State Representative Tara Rios Ibarra. We had District 43, which ran from Harlingen all the way to Kingsville, South Padre Island to the east. It was a great experience. I was 21 working at the legislature. I couldn't have asked for a better experience.
Yeah.
I will tell you, government salaries aren't very good. I was barely making it. Austin is very expensive.
Yeah.
But really you do it because you want the experience. You
Yeah.
want to give back. And they say it's a rite of passage in Texas politics to work as a staffer at the Texas House of Representatives.
Yeah.
I was there for 2 years. I was in task with a subcommittee. I did a lot of the work with the state rep. I did everything from writing speeches to answering emails, answering constituents. So you really learn the nuts and bolts of how our state government works.
The operation.
The operation. And here in Texas, it's very important because power really resides with the legislature.
Yeah.
With the Senate and the House of Representatives. You see, you could say it's a weak governor system. And so really you have to understand the House. And House is really the essence of Texas politics.
Yeah.
So that was really what opened my eyes to really want to help out and do more things for my community. At one point, very interesting, I don't know how we end up in a room with the governor. And at one point, everybody just leaves. So you can imagine, I was 22 and you have Rick Perry, who, I mean, has been our governor for years. I mean, everybody looks up to Rick Perry. And I'm there, I'm thinking, okay, what am I going to talk to him about? So, believe it or not, he carried on a very friendly conversation. And at the end, he told me, you should get your law degree. It doesn't matter where you go. You don't have to go to UT, being an Aggie. You don't have to go to UT. Just get your law degree. It doesn't matter where you go. He's like, it's the one thing that I should have done that I never got done.
Yeah.
And he's like, it's the one thing I wish I would have done.
Wow.
So I said, you know what? He's right. So from that point on, I bought a couple of books to take the LSAT, the famous LSAT. I took the LSAT and I went back to St. Mary's University.
Wow.
I went back for law school. They gave me a decent scholarship because law school is very expensive, but I got a pretty decent scholarship, went back to St. Mary's. My first summer of law school, I had the honor of clerking for Fred Berry, who's the chief judge for the Western District of Texas. And I can tell you, Judge Berry he's just an outstanding man.
Yeah.
And he'd always tell us that you practice law because it's an art. It's like acting. See, you get better at it. That's why we practice it.
Yeah.
And that's why it's a social science.
Yeah.
It's a humanities. It's not an exact science. So you practice the art of law. And from there, I interned I had a professor, Al Kaufman. Al Kaufman is considered one of the top 25 lawyers in Texas history. Al Kaufman litigated the Edgewood ISD cases, or what they call the Robin Hood cases, which actually define how our independent school districts are allocated resources. That is, so Al was like, César, you need to go work for MALDEF. It's like, I don't even know who MALDEF was at that point. He's like, doesn't matter, we're gonna go, and I'm gonna set you up with this lady called Nina Perales. I had never heard of any of these people. I was like, Nina Perales and MALDEF, and I'm a second-year law student. I mean, I'm trying to pass my classes. I mean, I'm trying not to get kicked out.
They're trying to set you up for your future.
Exactly.
And you're like,
I need to actually pass my contract class before I can move on. And so Al takes me and I meet Nina Perales, who's MALDEF's lead litigator. MALDEF is the Mexican American Legal Defense Education Fund. So they do impact litigation, everything from school rights to voting rights. They actually were the group that just litigated the I started working on redistricting, and this was around the 2010 period, so we worked on redistricting with MALDEF. And then from there, my last summer, I actually did an internship with the U.S. Attorney's Office here in Brownsville.
wow.
And interning here with the U.S. Attorney's Office, I got to meet great people, and that's the moment I decided that maybe I should come back home.
Yeah.
After 10 years, I said, I'm gonna give my hometown a shot. So I sat for the bar. I graduate in May. I sit for the bar in August, and I come back in October. I get my license November 1st, I believe.
Wow.
So in the course of 6 months, I had to move back to my hometown after 10 years.
It didn't feel like 10 years, I'm sure, right?
It did not. And let me tell you, when I came back, it didn't feel like 10 years had actually gone by in Brownsville.
Did it look like 10 years, like from?
Well, I will tell you, for me, it did look because of I had a less hair and I had a beard. But overall, as our community, I was like, well, have we actually grown? You see, we have grown in population, but we hadn't really grown when it came to economic development, when it came to actually being a more prosperous community. I think we even started going back a little, if you ask me.
So, really quick, looking at your upbringing, and then, where you studied, the people that you met with, clerking in Austin, you basically experienced different systems, and you kind of learn, hey, guess what? When you are trying to get things done, there's a system, there's processes, there's procedures, and there's proven practices, and then there's, hey, let's flip a coin practices and hope for the best.
Exactly.
It seems like, based on your background, you're very metric based. You like to measure things, and you like to focus on, okay, is there growth here, and what can we do, and what can we adjust? What is your definition of government? You have a very unique definition of government, and I think it leads to how you practice. So talk to us about your definition
Sure.
of government.
And I think that one, Mark, Mark and I have had a lot of prior conversations. And the other day, somebody brought up the issue that we should run our government. We should run government like a business, and we hear a lot, especially in these times at the national stage. But it doesn't make sense. It's an illogical premise, because really the end goal of a company is to maximize shareholder profits.
Yeah.
But the end goal of a government is to maximize the welfare of its citizens. You see, and how do we maximize our welfare? Well, we have first to define welfare.
Yeah.
Is it education? Is it quality of life? Is it economic development? I think it's a little bit of all the above. And so really our role as elected officials is how do we maximize the welfare of our citizens? And that's what we should be focusing on. The best for the most.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, my undergraduate degree, I forgot to mention, is in economics.
Yeah.
And
minor.
So very, very interesting, because a lot of times you don't really get attorneys who have a social science background. They usually do English, they do literature, they do political science, but you don't have a lot of us that have done something like math or economics or business.
Yeah.
And I think this interplay between economics and government
is dangerous.
Well, you could say it's dangerous for some people, because we're changing the way we're doing things.
Correct.
And a lot of times people can say that we're crazy, but as they say, the only thing that's crazy is keep doing the same thing you've been doing if you want change.
Yeah.
And so from there, I came back to Brownsville. I started practicing. I started practicing about a year in. I was trying to bring an investor to Brownsville, and I will tell you, it became almost impossible. It was literally like talking to the wall. I mean, my permitting department, everything, it was just horrible. I can tell you it was a horrible experience. And I'm pretty sure a lot of people that have tried to open up businesses have run through some of these same problems. You see, and that's another thing, as you know, Mark, the only way to solve a problem, in my opinion, is we actually have to understand that there is a problem. We have to acknowledge that we have a problem. And at that point, my investor basically got so fed up. He said, I'm going to McAllen. For me, that was the moment I decided I had to do something. And I said, I'm not going to run for mayor, because I frankly was 28. I don't think I was qualified to be a mayor. It's a big responsibility. Brownsville's a big town. And at the end of the day, you're toying with people's tax dollars. We have emergency services, so we have people's lives in our care. We have a lot of tax dollars on our care. So it's a big responsibility. And I think it's important that elected officials understand, not only locally, but at the state level and at the federal level, that, it's a real responsibility. And I think all the way from the president, he can wage wars. A governor, as we see in natural disasters, the governor has to take action. And here at the local level, we have to make sure that our emergency services are up to par, so our public safety can really benefit everybody. When you call that 911, you want to make sure that the ambulance is going to show up. When you call 911 because there's somebody's breaking into your house, you want to know that 3 or 4 patrolmen will actually show up.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the quality of life. Brownsville's very blessed. We are, I think, the second most safest city along the U.S.-Mexico border, if I'm not mistaken.
Let's say that again.
We are the second safest. For those of you in Washington, here at the border, Brownsville is the second safest city along the U.S.-Mexico border. We are much safer than other cities, including Chicago.
Yeah.
Including Washington, D.C. So I think it's something that's very important, because we get a lot of bad rap, and we heard it. We had it from a couple of people, CEOs from different companies. Well, how safe is it in Brownsville? Well, I can tell you it's very safe. It's very safe. I live here. I plan to have a family here. My parents live here. And Mark, Steve, everybody that's watching us, we all share a common home, and it's very safe. So I come back. I decide I'm going to run for office. Again, just like student government. I'm like, well, where do I start?
Yeah.
And I really had no idea of how even to begin. I had helped out in a couple of campaigns. We had done some community organizing through MALDEF on the west side of San Antonio. So I said, I'm going to run a very grassroots campaign.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, I don't have money, and I need volunteers. So where can I find volunteers that are willing to help? Well, as you all know, we were all college students once. So I went down to UTV, now UTRGV. And I just stood in the corner. I started going and talking to the poli-sci club, the marketing club, and I started getting volunteers. I had a wonderful young lady named Maggie Rios. She's now working in Houston. She was working at Amphos at that time as an intern. And she actually helped me recruit volunteers. So we ended up recruiting almost 45 volunteers.
And people that just wanted to see their city.
They just wanted to participate. And they asked me, Cesar, what do you want? And I said,
I want to win. I want to win.
Well, I think we all want to win. In life, we all want to win. But the thing is, it's how you win that matters. You
Correct.
see, it's how you win. And you see all this in sports. I mean, you want to win with credibility. You want to win because you're talented. You want to win because you're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Because if you cheat, it's eventually going to come out. So there's no point in trying to cut corners. We do this the right way.
Yeah.
So I said, guys, what is my goal? I don't want to change things. I just have a new vision. You see, we have a wonderful town. I don't want to be McAllen. I don't want to be Austin. I want to be Brownsville. But let's be Brownsville with a new vision. You see, let's really start making government work for the people. I mean, why is there a distance? I mean, really, we can just organize, we can go knock on doors, we get our name on the ballot, and we should be able to take the election. I thought it's a very simple premise if you actually bring it down to its most essence. It's just about going and talking to the voters.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, we knocked on over 1,500 doors.
Wow.
I did get a lot of people telling me that they thought I was a little too young. I did agree with them. I said, I also think I'm young, but you know what? Maybe that's a good thing because I'm not jaded, I'm not tainted. And we really want to make a change. And we went through with the election. Tell you, actually going around and talking to the voters, you start realizing that the city had many issues.
Yeah.
And from there, we started doing a game plan if elected. We were favored when it came down to the actual election. We got, I believe, 57% of the vote. So I didn't even go into a runoff. I do represent the whole city, so it was a citywide election. And now I felt, well, what do I do?
What's next?
What's next? And I will tell you, well, as a lawyer, what's the first thing you do? You go look at the law. So I went and I read the city charter. And as you go through the city charter, at the end, really, you understand that we have two responsibilities: public safety and economic development.
And let's break down public safety. What is public safety and what responsibilities does the city have there? And then let's talk about economic development and really define what is economic development. It's two great words that people like to use, but what is it?
Sure. Well, first, let's begin with public safety. We are responsible for police and fire. So every time somebody dials 911, we're responsible for that. We have a fire department that is cross-trained with EMS.
Yeah.
So most of our firemen are also EMS trained, and we're responsible for the safety of the city. When you start talking about economic development, a perfect example that I can illustrate this is our police cars. As we're working through the budget my first year in office, we start seeing that our fleet maintenance was over $1.2 million a year. Just to maintain our vehicles.
1.2 million yearly.
Just to maintain our vehicles. So being a good border brat and a good Mexican, I'm like, well, there's chanchulla or something going on, with the shop. What's going on here? So I was like, we start looking at it. I started talking to some of the commanders. We talked to the administration. We figure out that what had happened was, well, our cars were running 24/7. So an officer would show up to the police station. They'd drop off their car and they'd pick up a vehicle. They use it for their 8 or 10 hour shift. They bring it back, next officer would use it, another 10-hour shift. So basically the cars were running 24/7.
Yeah.
So after a year, they had 200,000 plus miles. They were breaking apart.
It was more like a model, like a library. An officer checks out a car, uses it, and then checks it back in.
And we know it. Can you imagine? I mean, if you go, something that's borrowed, you're never going to treat it as something that's yours.
Correct.
And so I was like, well, what can we do? We started looking at best practices, or as you like to say, proven practices, and we looked at the LAPD model. They have a take-home model where most of their officers take their cars home. And what does this do? Well, one, it creates more police presence in the community.
Yes.
Two, if there's ever an emergency, well, you can call all your patrolmen at once. Third, you give the officer their own car. So it's a sense of pride. It's my car. It's how well maintained is it. So it's a sense of ownership. You see, that really makes you take care of your stuff. So we went off and we purchased about 72 cars.
Wow.
And those are the new cars that some of the people see around the city. Well, the thing was, of course, the first year was going to be more expensive. But if you look at the total cost over the lifespan of these vehicles, which is 5 to 7 years, we're actually going to be saving money by the third year.
Wow.
And every patrolman has a new car. And some of these cars only have 5,000-6,000 miles, and they've had them for a year.
And this is a different way of operating that Brownsville hasn't done before. And you guys are going to test it, but based on the calculations and the numbers and the proven practices that you've looked at, it seems like an innovative, good way to do it.
And really, that's one of the things that we have to do at the local governments. You see, before we even get into economic development, it's important to note that one of the things that has happened in Texas and throughout the United States is really the state government, every single legislative session, keeps cutting their budgets. And they keep cutting their budgets because their logic is that we're not going to raise taxes. But unfortunately, there are needs that we have to fulfill through these taxes. You see, so it's really, where are we allocating these taxes? But more importantly, even this past legislative session, they've left more and more up to the municipalities.
Yeah.
The state always has to actually balance their budget, but by them balancing their budget, they leave us in the red.
Correct.
So we don't have enough money to do economic development. We don't have enough money to actually fill the needs and wants of our citizens. Because a lot of the needs should be filled by the state government. But because they're not collecting enough revenue, because they don't want to raise taxes, well, it's actually making local municipalities and school boards actually raise their taxes, as happened here in BISD.
Yeah.
Why? Because if you actually go back and you look at the historical markers, the state would actually contribute a large share of the total cost of public education here in Texas. But that's been reduced through the last legislative sessions, so now the local ISDs have to make up for it.
Correct.
By raising taxes.
Bonds.
So, bonds, taxes. And the cities are in the same. You look at cities, large cities like San Antonio, Dallas, they're constantly doing bond issuance.
Yeah. And it's all the same pool of money.
It really is.
It's all the same pool of money.
The thing is that it really puts the pressure on the local officials.
Correct.
But this is a responsibility that our elected officials at the state level should be taking on.
Yeah.
And so from there, that kind of leads you into economic development. And why does that lead into economic development? Because when you talk about economic development, it's not just about projects. It's about like an innovation economy and community development. We want to create a community that innovates, and we want to have a community where people want to live here.
Yeah.
So one of the problems that we face at the border is, well, and we hear this constantly, why is Brownsville poor? I don't think we are the poorest city in the nation, if you ask me. I think we have a big underground economy. We are a border city.
Yeah.
But more importantly, I think the metrics that are used, Mark, are you get the total amount of population and you divide it by our total budget. You see? So if you divide our budget this year, it's 134 million. But if we do round numbers, let's say we did 100 million. We have about 250,000 people, or 200,000. That leaves us about $500 in services for each citizen. So we have $500 for every citizen of Brownsville. Now imagine that for police, fire, streets, drainage. And that is why all municipalities in Texas start getting into this vicious cycle where they're not collecting enough. Why?
Yeah.
You have $500 of level of services. Out of 100 million in round numbers, the police and fire, which is public safety, account for about 63%.
Wow.
So then you start adding our other payrolls and the other things that the city has to fulfill the needs.
Services.
Well, we're only left with about 5 or 6% for discretionary projects, which are streets, drainage, things that we actually need to fix.
So, you have at the state level, because of whatever reasons, political, whatever reasons, the budgets, the way that they've addressed budgets is basically by saying, hey, we're going to shift this responsibility to the cities.
Yes.
Cities have a certain amount of services that they have to provide, and guess what? Similar to a business, you have a revenue stream. Economic development, which is becoming a huge deal for a lot of cities, is the necessity. Necessity is the mother of invention. Is because of the downfall of the budget at the state level. So when you really think about the reason why cities are focusing so much on economic development, it's because, guys, we have so many expenses, and if we don't, we're going to have to start cutting those services. And
really, the last thing you want to cut is your public safety.
Oh, of course.
You see, because that's the essence of your municipality.
Yeah.
But like here in Brownsville, we need more police officers.
Correct.
But the thing is, we really, frankly, don't have the money for it. I mean, plain and simple. So we're actually working with the administration right now to figure out a 5 to 6 year plan to hire more officers. And so we go back to this economic development. Why do we want economic development? Or why do we actually look, or why does the city even want it or need it? Well, we go back to this little example where we have $500 for quality for products, or for basically all these services that the citizen requires.
Yeah.
That is why I believe Brownsville is poor. Because if you look at other cities such as Dallas, where their property taxes are much higher, they have about anywhere from $1,100 to $1,200 for every citizen.
Wow.
You see, so they have double what Brownsville has.
Mm-hmm.
So what ends up happening, well, how do I make my property taxes or my property values rise? Well, the only way is to actually have fixed assets. And if you have fixed assets, you need people that will work in those fixed assets will then pay sales taxes. So if we get sales tax and we get property taxes, well, we should have more money coming into the coffers of the city of Brownsville.
Yeah.
And if we have more money coming in, well, we can provide better services. We can do streets, we can do more police officers, we can have better equipment at the fire department. And I just want to note that our police have everything they need, and the fire department has everything they need. But the thing is, we can always do better.
Of course. There's so much new technology
Yes.
that is
and training and
Yeah.
and I'll give you other places where we had to get creative. So we have a police academy that we work with TSC. We signed an MOU at the city, and that way we had professors that could start training some of our cadets. We also signed an MOU with TSC for our firemen. Why? Because this is another thing where economics plays out, and you want to attack problems differently, right, than we've done in the past. So in the past, we would always have our firemen, because Brownsville's so unique. We have a dive team, we have high-rise buildings. I mean, we have flats, we have grasslands, we have wetlands. So our fire department is very unique. We have to train in very different scenarios or environments. So what ended up happening, our firemen were going to Houston, they were going to Dallas, they were going to New Orleans for training, and it was costing us an arm and a leg. So what we decided to do is we partnered up with TSC, and now we have a fire academy where we can actually bring the professor, and we can train 30 firemen. Wow. So instead of sending 30, I just bring one guy.
Much more efficient
it's
and
much
effective.
more efficient and effective, and at the end we still get the same results. So these are some of the things that we've been trying to change through some of these economic studies, or how do we make it more efficient. So we start using some of these keywords that we hear in business: efficiency.
So diving into economic development right now, GBAC, GBIC, which is the Greater Brownsville Incentives Corporation, there was a recent announcement that they're going to basically take the reins of economic development. Talk to us a little bit about that and how that came about, but most importantly, what direction is GBAC going in now when it comes to economic development?
Well, sure. Well, let me start by addressing that in the past, Brownsville had the Brownsville Economic Development Corporation, BDC. BDC came about because at one point, I believe, there was a need for an economic development engine. So back in the 80s, I think the legislature passed the local economic development codes, which allowed for type A and type B economic development entities. So GBAC was created basically to hire the Brownsville Economic Development Corporation.
Yes. And
so the city of Brownsville would appoint members to GBAC, and GBAC would in itself outsource its responsibilities to this nonprofit called the Brownsville Economic Development Corporation, which had its own board and its own executive director.
Yeah. And it was being funded by
your tax dollars. Basically, every dollar that comes into the city of Brownsville in sales taxes, 50 cents goes to the general fund, a quarter goes to GBAC, which is Greater Brownsville Incentive Corporation, and another one goes to BCIC, which is the Brownsville Community Improvement Corporation, which are quality of life projects, where we're actually here today.
Yes.
So big shout out to my chairman, Tino Villarreal, if
there
he's
we
watching
go.
us.
There we go.
And to all the BCIC board members and all their staff who do a wonderful job for the city of Brownsville. So they get a quarter, GBAC gets a quarter, the city gets 50 cents. This usually comes out to anywhere from about $11 to $14 million a year. So GBAC would subcontract BDC, and BDC was responsible for doing our economic development. I will tell you that at one point, one of the issues was there really was no direction. And that wasn't really BDC's fault or GBAC's fault. It was really that there was a lack of vision from the leadership. You see, it's like, where does the mayor want to go? Where does the commission want to go? Where do the citizens want to go? So with no direction, BDC just continued to do the operation. I will tell you, for many years, is a great running organization. They have great members. They still have great members, and there's a lot of them who are actually now going to participate with our Greater Brownsville Incentive Corporation. In the beginning of the 2000s, most cities in Texas started moving away from this dual model. You see, and one of the reasons why these models came popular was that they believed that it would insulate them from politics.
You have someone else doing it.
Yes, and this is, I mean, you have to remember, this is the Ronald Reagan era, this is George Bush Sr., this is Bill Clinton. I mean, this is the 90s, right? So there's this move towards privatization. You know, you want government out of, you don't want the government messing around with anything because they're inefficient.
Yeah.
And so really you have these nonprofits who said, you know, we're going to isolate ourselves from politics. But unfortunately here in Brownsville, after many years, I think they've isolated themselves from the community. And at the end, there was a disparity between the needs of the community and the type of businesses we were looking for. We had a company that came in, and we were very good at bringing them, you know, recruiting, courting them, you see, so to speak. So you're courting a girlfriend for many months, and you finally get that date, and it turns out, well, you're going to take her to Circle K to buy her a cup of coffee. And I think here we have this company who relocated to Brownsville, and as they relocate, they start their operations, they figure out that they're missing workforce, that they did not have the skilled labor they needed to operate their businesses. Let me tell you, this company had machines brought in from Japan, very, very advanced machines. At one point, they had to bring people from Chicago, from LA, to start operating these machines here in Brownsville.
The human capital.
The human capital. So you start realizing that it's not just about bringing the company. It's about, well, what do they actually need?
Performing.
And more interestingly was that this company said, you know, we want to break into the North American market. We know that your labor costs here are cheap. So it really wasn't about how much money we were throwing at them, which was usually the traditional model through the BDC and GBAC. Company comes in and we give you, I think, $3,000 for every job you create. But my thing is, well, why don't we do that for all local taquerias? Why don't we do it for our local stripes? I mean, why don't we do it for all these little mom and pop shops that we have in Brownsville? Man, they also have to pay bills. So why don't we give $3,000 to all our locally grown businesses?
Yeah.
So for me, that's always been a no-no, because all we're doing is basically, it's a race to the bottom.
Yeah.
And at the end, you're really giving them monies that could go to streets, schools, public safety. So really, we wanted to refocus how we're going to approach economic development. And we said, we're going to create an environment that's conducive to business. In other words, we're going to bring the workforce people need. We're going to know what our assets are. I'll give you an example. We're water rich in the valley. I mean, everybody talks about droughts. You go up to San Antonio, they're on a stage 3 drought. You can't water your lawns. Here in McAllen, Brownsville, I mean, the RGV, we have so much water. We take it for granted. But there's a lot of industries that are water intensive.
Yeah, agriculture.
And why don't we target those companies? We were doing a shotgun approach, and we want to do a sniper approach. We want to target.
Calculated.
Yes, calculated. We actually want to be bringing companies that benefit us. You see, we have comparative advantages in certain areas, but we should be focusing on those. We shouldn't just be doing the shotgun approach to see what lands here. And then, secondly, well, what type of industry do you actually want?
Yeah.
You see, and I think this has become a debate with like the LNGs.
Correct.
You see, it's, well, what type of development do you want?
Yeah.
I can tell you, I think the main issue with the LNGs is the property taxes. I think one of the things that we've noticed here in Brownsville that we also want to change is that every time a new company moves in, they just want tax abatements. But if you understand that the bread and butter of how your city is run and what actually pays for all these services are property taxes, then you start realizing, well, maybe we shouldn't give a cut to a multi-million-dollar company.
Yeah. They don't need it.
They don't need it. And yeah, their shareholders will be very happy.
Yeah.
But then we go back to, well, my responsibility is my citizens.
Correct.
So I'm going to look out for them. And I really don't care what a guy from New York that runs a company comes and tells me. It's like, what are you going to do for my citizens? You're coming here. So then you start looking at what type of development you actually want. And that's why one of the things that we're doing at GBAC is that now that we are restructuring, well, you said, what do you mean by restructuring? Well, we asked the BDC, we asked for an audit, we asked for certain things, and we realized that really their approach to economic development was just trying to recruit outside firms. But they left the gap of actually developing our existing firms and helping new firms here in Brownsville actually get off the ground. they also had failed to do any workforce development. See, and honestly, I don't think it's so much BDC's fault. I think it was more of the city's fault, more of GBAC's fault, because we never gave them any direction. So I think that is part of one of the faults we have as leaders. I think a lot of times when you get elected, you always want to blame the guy that was here before you.
Yeah.
But we've now taken this approach where we at the commission, we are now taking responsibility for everything.
Good.
Because if we don't take responsibility, we can't change it. So it doesn't matter what's happened in the past, we're now going to fix it. And we are responsible. So I include myself in this lack of direction, lack of foresight. Now we've basically asked BDC what they wanted to do. I think BDC and GBAC will be going their separate ways. BDC will continue to try to recruit firms as a member-driven organization, and I commend them for that. You know, they've been active for many years. It would be great to see how they work with the GBAC, just like we work with the Chamber of Commerce, just like we work with Texas Southwest College or Texas State Technical College. You see, it's about teamwork. It's about team building.
Of course.
And I like to tell people at the city, whenever we start a meeting, I don't care if you're blue and R, what God you believe in, what color skin you have. I want you to leave all that at the door. Here in Brownsville, we're a family. And we start meetings at GBAC, at the City Commission. I want everybody to leave everything at the door because we are working for the citizens of Brownsville.
Yeah.
And it has a higher sense of duty. And
Calling.
It's a calling. It really is. So then we start looking at, well, what do we want to do with our economic development? You know, what are we doing? So one of the things we did is GBAC has now been restructured. We have an interim executive director. We are now with the governor's office. We have become the EDO of record at the governor's office. So everything that's coming to Brownsville and the Port of Brownsville will be coming through GBAC. So there is continuity to all these projects. Nothing's going to fall by the wayside. Our interim executive director, Gilberto Salinas, is actually was a former employee at the BDC, and he was actually the leader when we landed SpaceX. So Gilberto was part of that team. So Gilberto has the institutional knowledge to continue some of these projects that we already embarked on. So we are not letting anything fall by the wayside. Now everything that's grandfathered in, we're acknowledging it, we're helping you. How can we help aside from giving you money?
Yeah.
So
So I guess what I'd like to ask is, in a picture perfect world, which we know we don't live in one, but I always like to ask that, in a picture perfect world, how would economic development work in the city of Brownsville? Let's just give an example. There's a company that wants to come in, regardless of the industry. In a picture perfect world, how would that work?
Okay, well, we're talking about two different scenarios. So one, Mark, is where we actually go recruit. Another one is where they come recruit us. I will tell you, in my perfect world, that is what I want.
Okay.
I want companies courting Brownsville.
Okay.
I want companies to come to Brownsville because they want to come here. So let's, for example, say that I have Yokohama Tires from Japan, and they want to move to Brownsville.
Are they looking to come to Brownsville, or is this an inside scoop?
It's not. I wish it was. They are actually in the Mississippi, I think it's called the Tri-County Delta area. I think for those of you who have seen 60 Minutes with Mr. Higgins, who's their economic development director up there, that's one of the things that he's been working on. He actually landed that tire company, and it's a great story if you ever get a chance to read it. He actually tracked all the high executives for this company, and when he brought them to his little part of the country, he even had shoes for them made. He had everything. He knew their size. They knew their coat size. So, I mean, this guy was a good seller.
Yeah.
And he was a closer. And so
most
they end
importantly,
up... Most importantly, a closer. So they come, they contact the Greater Brownsville Incentive Corporation, GBAC. They go, we are part of Texas One. So usually how this happens is they probably call the governor's office. And they're talking that they want to move to the lower Rio Grande Valley. And that's how they contact GBAC, because we are the EDO of record. So once they contact GBAC, well, basically this is where we now start some of this new restructuring I'm talking about. We're actually going to buy I want to buy two Suburbans for GBAC and BCIC. And when people from out of town come, we want to be able to actually take them on a tour. And we want to take them to our sites where they could actually place their factories. We want to take them to our schools. We want to take them to our colleges. We want to take them to our parks, to our trails.
Let them taste the water.
Well, that one we're just going to kind of slip it in their coffee. We're just going to put it in there, and that way they get. We'll take them for some tacos. Once we get them to drink the river water, we take them for some tacos.
Wash it out.
I think they'll be good. They're set for Brownsville, and so from there, we take them around, they look at our assets. And then from there, we sit down and we tell them, look, this is how many people we can bring to the table. This is what we can do for you. One of the things is now that we have this thing where we have this reshoring, or all these companies coming back from China to the U.S., and the administration talks about it, President Trump talks about it all the time. Well, how do we bring back skilled labor? Well, in the 90s when everything left, all the skilled labor basically died out. So we have almost a two-generational gap when it comes to skilled labor. And here in Brownsville, we saw with this company that I've mentioned, well, they couldn't find people to work there. So what did we do? Well, we don't want to be dictating to the private industry what they have to do. So we decided to partner up with UTRGV. This is one of these new strategic partnerships that we're forming through GBAC. And basically, the company comes in and we gave them vouchers. And they can go use these vouchers with UTRGV School of Engineering. So now this company that we're talking about, basically we had the number one problem was workforce development. It was something that was never originally given to them as an incentive package. But of course, as things change, as the market changes, well, we have to change also to fit the needs of the people that come actually hire our citizens. So at that point, we decided to give this company vouchers. They go with UTRGV, and UTRGV will be actually training their people. So now we give the companies the opportunity to have an institution, albeit TSC or UTRGV, to train their workforce.
Which those institutions love, I'm sure.
Oh, they love it, because you start working on what they call like the South Carolina model, where you have kids that are going all the way from high school out to college, and then they have a job when they go out because they have apprenticeship programs.
Very calculated.
Very calculated. I mean, I want to become the Germany of North America. I want all my kids that go through high school with BISD to then go off to, even if they want to do an associate's, if they want to do an apprenticeship, or if they want to go to a 4-year institution. Yeah. I actually want them to be able to come back and stay here, because this leads us to the brain drain problem that we have. Most of our talented kids, they leave and they don't come back. And it's hard. I mean, when I talk to some of my fellow classmates, well, if he's a banker with Goldman Sachs in New York, what is he going to come do here in Brownsville? Yeah. I mean, IBC is not going to offer him the investment banking position that he has in New York. Yeah. So even if he wants to come back, there's no opportunity for him to come back. And that is one of the saddest things we ever have to share as an elected official, that our community doesn't offer all these opportunities. Yet.
Keyword. Really quick, speaking of TSC, Melinda Rodriguez, she commented, our city leadership, especially the GBIC board, is taking progressive steps to advance our economic development and prosperity. So thank you, Melinda, for that comment. People are taking notice.
Well, let me tell you, Melinda is a great asset to our community. Melinda was the Chamber of Commerce president. Thank you, Melinda, for watching us. She's now with Texas Southmost College. Let me tell you, they are growing in leaps and bounds.
Yes.
And they're actually one of our strategic partners, and because we can't do it without our community colleges. So we go back to this team effort. And I think it's time that we all work in collaboration. And what is really the end goal? Well, the end goal is to bring good companies to Brownsville. I mean, we want good paying jobs.
Yeah.
I want jobs where they're not paying a minimum wage. I want $15, $16, $20 an hour jobs.
Yeah.
And, well, how do we get there? Well, I will tell you, some people's notion of economic development was, for the valley, build more bridges. And we've looked at that model. We know, take for example, Laredo. Laredo is the largest land port in the nation. And per capita, they're still poorer than Brownsville. So you realize that just having more bridges doesn't amount to more economic development. What we need to do is we need to have a value added.
Yeah.
I'll give you an even better example now that we're talking about economics and our brethren in Matamoros. Matamoros produces about $8 billion through their maquilas.
Say that again?
$8 billion.
I mean,
$8 billion in Matamoros.
That's a big number.
And, yes, billion. And, billion, right?
It sounds nice saying it.
It sounds nice. And the 8 billion, it's about 8.4, I believe. And out of the 8.4, about 6 million of that product is actually brought from other parts. In other words, they're just assembling. They're not manufacturing. When we look at Brownsville, it's the same thing. We assemble, but we don't manufacture. So what I want is, I want to create clusters. I want to create innovation. And there's a couple of clusters. I think you had Dr. Marina and Dr. Kroll talk about their BINET initiative. You see, that's an advanced manufacturing cluster.
Yeah.
You see, that is just the cornerstone because we want to take it to the next level and work with companies such as SpaceX. SpaceX is, I think, almost 90% vertically integrated. So most of the stuff they do is in-house. But you see that 10%. I want to be building that 10%.
It's a large 10%.
It's a huge, and I will tell you, I want to build their nano satellites. You know, nowadays they were telling me that on an iPad about the size of yours, they could put about 15 repeaters on a satellite, send it up to space for about $1,000 for each one of those. So for like 45 grand, you could send a nano satellite up to space.
Wow.
That is really the end goal of where we want to be. We want to be producing those nano satellites. We want to be producing rockets. And I understand that maybe at one point SpaceX, if they do launch from here, will have to build rockets. And you can't be just flying rockets across the country. No, they have to be assembled here. So I want to have my workforce ready to take that. And how do you do that? Well, I'll give you an example. At UTRGV, they have the Stargate program. They have kids working on innovation. They innovate. They put their product in the stream of commerce. They sell it to SpaceX. SpaceX now has that company selling to them here. Then you have another one, and another one, and another
Local
one.
producers.
Local manufacturing.
Yeah.
That's what we want. We need to have a value added. We need to be proud of what we're producing. You see, and one of the things, a basic principle in economics is you have capital and labor. You see, and back in the day, well, we didn't have much capital. You start off with a bunch of labor. But as you start getting richer, a country gets richer, you start adding more and more capital. But it gets to a point where it plateaus. You can only add so much capital, you can only add so many more laborers. So how do you grow an economy? You have to grow it through innovation.
Let's talk about the Binational Economic Development Zone, BINED. Dr. Carlos Marin, Dr. Mark Kroll, the UTRGV Dean of Business. These two guys, and I know that you're working with them, are working on BINED, and it's very interesting because it's very location specific to Brownsville and Matamoros. Talk to us a little bit about what BINED does and why something like this could work in a lot of different areas. This example of a cluster, I guess you could say.
Well, there's a lot of reasons for it, Mark. One is the cost of labor, especially at the border.
Yeah.
Relative to other parts, we are relatively cheap. I will tell you one of the areas that we want to target for companies to relocate here are some of these Norway, Finnish companies. They per capita innovate more than any other countries in the world. And their cost of labor are huge because they're in the low countries. I mean, these guys are making $50-60 an hour.
Yeah.
And so some of those companies, if we could relocate them to Brownsville, they could do some of their more labor intensive operations in Matamoros and some more of the skilled operations in Brownsville. So you see, you have the low-skill operations on one side, and you have more advanced manufacturing on the other.
Mm-hmm.
But we use both assets on both sides of the border. We could even take it a step further. We could actually create safe zones. In other words, that if you enter through the U.S. or you enter through Mexico, you can operate, you can go back and forth within this cluster, and you can move freely. And that way you have people from Matamoros and people from Brownsville working together in a closed environment. And why is this idea? It sounds kind of crazy, but it's not really. You start looking at some of the companies that want to come relocate to Matamoros. Take, for example, a Japanese company. Well, the CEO and the people that they want to relocate here for that maquila want to live in Brownsville, but he's going to be working in Matamoros. So currently, he couldn't live in Brownsville because he'd be working in Matamoros, so there'd be no visa for him. But if he goes and lives in Matamoros, he wants his family to live in Brownsville, he can't. So there is no visa that allows you to do something like this. So one of the things we want to do is we want to create safe zones. We've even talked about lobbying our congressman. Congressman Vela is very open to the idea of actually creating a subcategory within the visa realm where we could have a border visa, where basically you could have people from, let's say, Japan or Germany who live in Brownsville and they work in Matamoros, and
Wow.
vice versa.
And when you think about that top of mind, you say, oh wow, you know what, that makes sense. There's going to be a lot of people that will say, okay, well, what about the safety of our border? What about, that's always going to be the first argument there. But
And I will tell you, when we talk about border security, even if you talk to people that are in Customs and Border Patrol, they will tell you that every sector has different needs.
yeah,
You see, what we might need in Brownsville is very different than what they might need in McAllen, than what they might need in Arizona and New Mexico. We have two municipalities that are basically next to each other. That's why we're sister cities. Just like Laredo, I think after Brownsville, Matamoros, it's Laredo who are actually at such close proximity. So there's parts, especially east of Brownsville, where the river kind of cuts into Mexico, so we can create these zones.
yeah.
So the river For those of you in Washington, D.C. Watching us, the river is not a straight line. And I think that's one of the most important things. I think when you looked at the model when they were first going to build this border wall, they literally would cut half of Brownsville out. The joke with Matamoros was that we were going to give them back their land. So,
well, it's really funny. There's so much that we can talk about, and we've already been talking for about 55 minutes.
Wow.
Time flies when you're having fun. But I kind of want to end on a positive note with SpaceX, and you're growing a relationship with Matamoros. You want Brownsville to work hand in hand with Matamoros. Talk to us really quickly about what you're forming there to have an ongoing line of communication with Matamoros.
Well, definitely. One of the first things is we've now started to do a lot of trips to Matamoros. It started with our 4th of July party 2 years ago. Now the mayor, the commissioners, we now have a more active relationship. Even the mayor of Matamoros and Tony, our current mayor here in Brownsville, Tony Martinez, they're putting together a Binational 10K race that will start here in Brownsville and in Matamoros.
Very cool.
We were also.
Do you need your passport to?
Yeah, unfortunately you do. Very, very cool point of a little tidbit of information. It used to be back in the day in the 50s and 60s when we had Charo days. We had what's called Paso Libre. So they would just let you go through. No papers, you didn't pay a toll, you just went and everybody came back.
Paso Libre.
My dad still remembers those days.
Wow.
And so our friendships go beyond this current administration.
Yeah.
And they will go beyond this one and the next and the next. Because our kids will be here and the kids for those of Matamoros will also be here. So these relationships will continue. It doesn't matter who's in Mexico City or who's in Washington. One of the things that we are trying to do is, at the end, we do know that decisions are taken at our nation's capitals. So we're creating this thing called Enlace Fronterizo through the U.S. consul in Matamoros and the Mexican consul here in Brownsville. So we're going to get the two consulates working together, and we're going to start working on economic development. We're actually going to start, and that way, even after I leave office, the mayor leaves office, and Chuchin and Matamoros leaves office, we want to create a symmetry, or we want to create a way for our communities to keep working together.
Yeah.
Because I think we need to create policies that transcend the elected officials. These are policies that are for Brownsville, not for us.
And one of the things that you've always said is when Matamoros does good, Brownsville does good, and when Brownsville does good, Matamoros does good.
That is true, and I think that is true all along the U.S.-Mexico border. We're neighbors, and we've been good neighbors for the past 100 years, and I want us to keep being great neighbors the next 100 years.
Last thing that we want to finish off is with SpaceX. So when you think of SpaceX, and this is very exciting, we want to paint the picture of how our region is going to transform, because SpaceX is not only going to be beneficial for Brownsville, but I mean, people on the South Padre Island are going to watch, and people are going to travel all over the region to be a part of this. There's going to be people that work for SpaceX and work for the supply chains of SpaceX that live all over the valley. But so think about it. SpaceX, they use rockets. They need to manufacture them, and like you said, they're not going to be shipping rockets all over the country. They're not going to manufacture them in Florida and ship them to Texas. They're not going to manufacture them in California and ship them to Texas. So when you think of, logistic-wise, if we could take a bet or an educated guess, where would these rockets and where would these things be manufactured and created if SpaceX is going to setting?
We have great, great talent, but we don't have the opportunities. So GBAC's role and my role is to create those opportunities.
And it's very exciting. We're very excited to have people like César that we can communicate with. Thank you everyone for tuning in. This conversation is all about educating the community, putting together ideas, bringing people together, and moving forward together. So for everyone that tuned in, thank you so much. And we'll be back very soon with many more updates from the city of Brownsville, Cameron County, etc. So until next time, talk to you then.